Saudi Arabia, and also United Arab Emirates and other countries will join as monitors, as well as the African Union. And the government invited at the first time as the Sudanese army. Then they complained against that, that they are representing the government, the people, the country, not just the army, because that will make them equal with the militia. Then they redesigned the invitation. Still, the government reluctant to go to Geneva, and the government raised some points that saying that the United States sponsored Jeddah, and Jeddah concluded some recommendation. One of them is the militia elements to evacuate the houses of the citizens that occupied in Khartoum and Madani and other cities, and the militia, rapid support forces, didn't do that. And also there is the question, if the United States sponsored Jeddah, why the need of Geneva again, and why the need of joining United Arab Emirates in the negotiation, while the Sudan submitted a complaint against United Arab Emirates, accusing the Emirate of supplying the rapid support forces with the weapons. And most of the observers of the Sudanese crisis noticed that the United States speeded up its steps after the Sudan being close to have a deal with Russia on military base on the Red Sea, and some agreements on military agreements between Sudan and Russia. So why United States is so serious to bring the two parties together, and why United States became flexible with the government of Sudan, not like before? That because they want to slow down or to stop the Sudanese-Russian agreement. This is why United States in hurry to have Geneva negotiation, and also because United States now in the election season, and Biden administration wants an agreement as an achievement, because they failed to make an achievement in Ukraine, they failed to make an achievement in Gaza, so that having an achievement in Sudan would be something good for the election presidential race for Kamala Harris and her new running mate, Tim Walz. From the side of Sudan, the government now, they didn't close the door of the possibility that they go to Geneva. I think they have some conditions. One of them, we will not slow down the Sudanese-Russian negotiation or having a deal. That will not happen. And also, they need some guarantees that this time the militia elements will evacuate from the neighborhoods, from the sections of the Khartoum city or Madani city, and they will leave the houses of the people that they occupied now by force, and make forced displacement, moving more than 2 million Sudanese from the capital Khartoum, that is only from the city of Khartoum, and another big number from the rest of Sudan. This is the situation now. My expectation that Geneva most likely will happen. My expectation that some modifications will happen to Geneva, and something in the bilateral between Sudan and the United States will happen. That is the short-term expectation. But I think on another hand, that also there is internal peace talks between the tribes that exploited by the militia. People in Sudan, some of them, they say that the tribes of the militia. I don't say that. I don't think that the militia has a tribe. Militia are just criminal criminals and thieves. So the tribes that exploited by the militia and some of the population joined the militia, and now they started a negotiation with the government and community to community negotiation or citizen to citizen or people to people negotiation that happened between the tribes and the communities that exploited by the militia, and now they are suffering. Also, the communities and the tribes affected and the cities affected by the militia. These negotiations now happening inside Sudan without foreigner mediator. It's really African solutions for African problems. Right. It has no good focus from the international media for sure, but it will have good focus from the African media, and that is why I am here, because I have access to the African media. African media reach Sudan, reach Sudanese speakers on the ground, reach Sudanese parties. But the Western media, they select whom they want, and they select what those people would say, supporting the negotiation in Geneva or in other place. I do believe the African Union and the IGAD, which is the Organization for the East Africa, they should support the internal efforts of peace. Right. And by the way, those efforts led to reconciliation in some areas. If we have more focus of the media, if we have cameras from Sudan that they go there and cover the area that accepted the internal efforts of peace, that would be a good story that will balance what is going on. But regarding the news now, you can read this news anywhere now. The people started to think that the solution in Geneva. The solution is not in Geneva. The solution either in Sudan or it will not happen. Or supported by African Union, supported by African solution for African problems, or it will be the same situation of Libya and Yemen. How many times Libyan people went to Geneva, to Europe, outside Africa? How many times the Yemeni factions went to Geneva or any other European countries? But what is the result? You have anything there? No, nothing happened. But when Sudan and South Sudan fought for 5 decades, and then there were negotiations in Naivasha, Kenya, and in Machakos, Kenya, in Addis Ababa. After that, there was an agreement, and the two countries lived in peace for some time. Yes, war happened after that, but it stopped after a few months. And then now you have Sudanese refugees in South Sudan. And that is the opposite of what we witnessed, at least in my life. South Sudanese refugees and displaced people in North, but now we have people that went from the North to the South direction, and they did something that we see the opposite of it for 15 years. But now we have refugees in Sudanese refugees in South Sudan. Also, I want to appreciate here and to thank the countries that hosted the Sudanese displaced people and refugees. Egypt, they hosted the biggest and the largest number of refugees from Sudan, and then Ethiopia, Eritrea, Chad, Libya. South Sudan.
Thank you very much, MEKKI, for a lot of insight you've given there. There are a lot of things you have said that have not been put out in the mainstream media now, especially with the conditions that the Sudanese government is giving to the United States in order to be part of these talks in Switzerland, a part where the Sudanese government has decided to sign a military pact with Russia. That has not been mentioned. We only hear in the mainstream media of conditions like the agenda of the meeting and those that are going to be part of the meeting. I want to thank you so much for this insight. And I'm going to come back to you with some questions with regards to what you just mentioned there. But first of all, let me get to Dr. FONGOD. Dr. FONGOD, now we listened to MEKKI a while ago, and he talked about providing African solutions to African problems. And he mentioned rightly that it's not holding talks in Geneva, Switzerland, that is going to bring a solution or is going to bring about a ceasefire in Sudan. What is your opinion on that? When we have issues on the continent, why is it always the case that the problem is being tried to be solved out of the continent? And why is that problem, the solution, not being sought around the continent?
Well, I think the reason for that is because while the rest of the world, especially developed nations, we are talking about the West primarily, and in some parts the East, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, while they are playing chess, we on the African continent are playing checkers. All right, while they are playing chess, in layman terms, in some part of the continent, we are playing draft. All right, and the reason for that is every single thing else that is happening to the African is a Western construct. Everything that is happening to the African is something that has literally been manipulated, thought about carefully in the West, and then they come to implement that, you know, because of their interest in Africa. And unfortunately, we still go back to the same people who are instrumental in destabilizing these regions, you know, to negotiate on their table. It's as if to say you want to go and negotiate the terms of your freedom from your slaver. That is insane. I don't know why, and I have not understood exactly why we have literally shifted from having the issues we have on the continent of Africa to be solved by Africans. The solution for the conflicts on the continent of Africa will be by Africans. It will be solved by Africans. Most of the issues we have on the continent of Africa is absolutely initiated, instigated from the outside, is never from within. Look at all the militia groups we have on the continent. Each and every one of them, everybody is absolutely looking for their own interests, and that is the problem that we are facing. And I like my co-panelists for basically so eloquently stating in detail what is happening in South Sudan. We understand the issues of the conflict, and obviously there are a lot of regional powers that are interested in making things happen so far as whatever their interests are in South Sudan. Okay, thank God for Egypt. Egypt is looking out for trying to be able to make sure that those who have escaped the war in Sudan have some kind of a safe haven, in Egypt. That's fine. But also Egypt has interest in the Nile. Egypt has vested interest in the control of the Nile. All right. And so the result of that is because of his farmland and power, and they have to do whatever it takes to be able to make sure that they protect that. You have countries like the United Arab Emirates providing military support to, groups like the RSF. Okay, you have UAE, which is extremely, interested because of its strategic economic ties, to Sudan. And we cannot underestimate any of that. United States is also playing a significant role. It's, forget about the mediating of talks and whatnot. The United States is looking at itself to make sure that whatever is taking place in Sudan does not basically takes out its place upon its geopolitical influence across the region, especially when it comes to Russia. So they will do whatever it takes to destabilize anything. Every single talk is meaningless if America's stamp is not on it. I have never understood exactly why we have to sit on the African continent and think that the salvation of the continent will have to come from the West. I have never understood why a bunch of African leaders will have to move to another territory. They will have to move out of the continent, all right, to Europe. For what? You know, what happened to South Africa? What happens to Kenya? What happens to places like Cameroon? Why are we not sitting in places like Cairo? Why are we not sitting in places like maybe Casablanca, Morocco? Why are we not going to Rwanda? Why are we not sitting in Africa to talk about Africa's issues? You know, when was the last time that you had any European nation coming to discuss their own political issues on the continent of Africa? When was the last time you have some countries in the Eastern Bloc, okay, in Asia, or, even in the Middle East, in Iran, coming to discuss their political issues, on the continent of Africa? But it is only Africans who find the need to be able, to go somewhere. I don't understand what the sense of importance is that we have to basically migrate out of the continent, to go and sit down somewhere in Europe, to talk about the issues that we are facing. Sudan in itself, it's receiving military support from Russia and from China. I think that has to basically be understood clearly, that there is military support coming in from China, there's military support coming in from Russia. China has vested interest in oil, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their stake in the country. And obviously, it's a buffet of issues. So if we really have to be able to solve what is happening in Sudan, I hope and pray that Sudanese should sit down, all right, and think about the future. The reality is this: when we love our children, all right, more than we hate our enemies, these conflicts would stop. Because there is no win-win situation out here. The reality is that the only win-win situation that we're going to find is peace. There is no think about taking over. My co-panelist spoke of the fact that we needed to be able to make sure that, the militia groups are being taken out of where the areas they're occupying and then pushed somewhere else. But the issue is, just like cancer, you have to find ways to put an end, to the cells that have so much decided to become, destructive to the entire body. You must cut that stuff off. What if you push them to another part of the country without any concrete resolution as to what is going on, and then integrating these people into society? Then you're just waiting for a day when something will happen, another Western power will come and say, this is what we want, and then we'll instigate them to come back and create the same conflicts, and the circle of violence, this circle, of war will continue, civil war will continue over and over again. We have to find ways in which we conclude, we bring definite conclusions, we put endings, we tie the loose ends to what it is that is happening with us so far as conflicts are concerned. So we cannot ignore, number one, we cannot dismiss, number two, we must tackle these issues head on. That means having concrete resolutions that are meaningful rather than these superficial things where we basically fly out to sit in Europe and talk about God knows what is happening on the continent of Africa. Geneva is not the headquarters of a united Pan-African. It's not Geneva. A United Africa's headquarters is not in Geneva. At best, it will be Cairo. At best, it will be Accra. At best, it will be some African country on the continent of Africa. I think it's quite shameful, to the African, to our intelligence. It's quite shameful to the fine men and women on the continent of Africa who are espousing the African ideal, the Pan-Africanism, who espouse this beautiful, notion of us coming together as a continent, okay, and becoming a bedrock for for global stabilization. If you look across everywhere else in the world, true, we are suffering, true, we are having all kinds of economic issues on the continent of Africa, true, we get that, but you can never underestimate just how powerful we've been, you know, either historically or going forward. We have the land, we have the manpower, we have the capacity, we have the ingenuity, we have the technical know-how. Most Africans are leading most tech companies around the world. We are in a good place, but we just need to put our act together. And I pray that whatever is happening in South Sudan begins to give us some kind of a template as we move forward, you know, in trying to bring ourselves onto a united front as a united Africa. So my take on Sudan is, just like my co-panelist said, the salvation of Sudan is not in Geneva. The salvation of Sudan is with the Sudanese.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Of course, we need to seek African solutions to African problems. It makes no sense, like you mentioned there, where we're having issues on the continent, and we're trying to get those issues solved out of the continent. And MEKKI said earlier on that right now there are meetings that have been taking place in Sudan between the government and some tribes, and that's something that the mainstream media has really not mentioned. We hear reports, or we see reports of the conditions that the Sudanese government is given, being just those who are going to be part of the meeting and what the agenda is going to look like. Now, with these meetings that are going on, as mentioned by MEKKI, do you think that's a way forward towards solving the problem in Sudan?
Regarding the meetings that happening in Sudan, or regarding the meeting is happening
in Sudan,
outside Sudan?
The meetings in Sudan.
Yes, in Sudan, sure, I'm following this issue. I will try to bring some videos, some testimonies from the tribal leaders of their point of view and how they suffer. The tribes that exploited by the militia and took their sons to fight against other tribes and to bring the money and the gold from here. And then the money and the gold was cursed. It didn't help them at all. It is just followed by diseases, it's followed by drought, and all things bad, because that's money taken from someone else. That's gold taken from the hands and the necks of ladies in front of their husbands and sons by threatening them with gun and weapons. That is something very bad, something very ugly. Believe me, the public opinion in Sudan now could have a new start and new change or a big change of what happened in Sudan. So the leaders, the community leaders from the tribes and the communities exploited by the militia came to other parts of the country where the communities affected by the militia attacks. And that happened community to community dialogue. And then they went also to the government and presented solutions for how to stop the war. And it happened. In some areas, leaders of the community, they withdraw their sons from the fight. Some of them killed, some of them lost hands, lost foot, anything happened to them, so that some areas started to be free of the conflict and the war, and people start to come back to the areas that is the Sudanese local reconciliation helped in settling the situation there. Also, by the way, some sad time but turned to happy time. I need to bring the person that invited the two communities in his home in the city in the north to Khartoum. Invited the communities, the leaders of the communities exploited by the militia, and the leaders of the community attacked by the militia and brought them together in his home. You know what happened? The militia sent drones and they bombed the meeting. Luckily, no injuries, because it wasn't accurate drone. So that the meeting didn't stop. They said that although the militia wants to stop us from having people-to-people dialogue, we will not stop. So they continued, and they came out with practical solutions. And now one of the things that's submitted by the Sudanese government to Geneva mediators and the United States, if you want to support peace, come to us. Send some people, send some organization to monitor and to see on the ground what the people are doing, and to watch the Sudanese will and to enhance the Sudanese internal. But I want to discuss something here, and also I need to elaborate more on that maybe another time. The role of the African Union. Unfortunately, we don't have a good role for the African Union. The African Union is just good at dismissing countries out of the African Union, and now the countries, which is Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso, they are making another union or another block out of the ECOWAS. Why? Because the African Union, instead of solving the problem happened in Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso, they suspended the membership, claiming that they are doing or they are practicing the agreement of election and democracy. But the same happened in other countries, but because they are protected by the Westerners, no way to suspend the membership. So it's a matter of like and dislike. It's a matter of not suspending the membership of countries with a problem, that suspending a membership of countries that they have chosen strong ties with Russia. By the way, I'm not supporting the strong ties with Russia, strong ties with the United States, with China. This is none of my business. Any country has to choose who is the commercial partner of the country.
Of course.
If they want the weapons from here and there, it's up to any country. We can't force countries to make alliances. But my issue here, the African Union is playing a role on behalf of the European Union and the United States, because the African Union is targeting countries that is in good relation with Russia. And you know, African will continue, will not stop. If you do something like that, now you are pushing the Russians in Africa more than you are stopping them, because it became a better friend than you, than the West. I'm not saying, by the way, and I want to confirm that again and again, I need African countries to be independent, to be united. I need African Union to be a strong unity organization. I covered the African Union for a long time, more than 10 years. I attend the summits of the African Union. I didn't miss major activities and big activities and function for the African Union. I can compare between the time of Madame Zuma and Moussa Faki. In the time of Madame Zuma, the African Union was stronger and more independent. But in the time of Moussa Faki, the African Union became more dependent on Europe and the West.
Right, Mekki, thank you so much. Now, I'm still with you. The African Union plays a crucial role in the continent, and like you mentioned, it is not playing that role effectively. What do you think needs to be done? Do you think that the African Union at this point in time needs reforms?
Definitely, it's reform and need to put people in account. I want to raise a question about suspending the membership of African countries. What did you get from that? African Union is an organization for development. So if you have a continental road crossing from Chad to Mali or to Senegal, and you have Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali. If you suspend the membership of countries that they are part of the continental road, when you start the meeting of the infrastructure, they are absent, so that you stop the road. So it was useless. And it was against the development in Africa. The issue of sanction is important from the West. What we have in Africa is not, you just rush to the sanction. You go to the reconciliation, you send wise men. Why do we have the panel of the wise in African Union? This is the question that I raised. When Burhan took decisions in 25th of October, and there was a problem between the civilian side and the military side, actually it wasn't a democracy, it was a transitional period. So even the component of the civilian side was not agreed upon among the civilian or the political itself. But let us say, okay, some of them joined part of the military leaders and created a government, and then the partnership collapsed. The African Union, according to the Charter of Election and Democracy, should send fact-finding mission and reconciliation. Okay, that is the text of the charter. And after that, if the country or the government didn't cooperate with the fact-finding mission or the reconciliation, you go to the suspending the membership, and you have different level of suspending the membership. You can suspend the right of voting inside the African Union, but the membership is existed because you need the countries in development meetings. If there is a meeting of high pressure electricity line, if there is a meeting on roads, you need the countries, you need the technicians at least, if you don't want the government from the country to say to you that the road cannot be from here and there, should accept the country from other side, and we can provide you with the studies and we can open the countries. But the African Union, because the civilians suspended by the military was blessed by the West. Because they were blessed by the West, and the West said the government should be suspended, so the African Union skipped on the fact-finding mission, skipped on the reconciliation, and jumped to the sanctions. And I ask simple question, what is the use of having the panel of the wise in African Union? What is the use of having expert on mediation? What is the use of those people if you just go and sanction? So that the African Union now, or before, let us be more optimistic, that during the crisis of Sudan, the African Union was part of the problem. But now, I want to be also fair. The African Union latest efforts started to be better, and I want to thank countries who practice some pressures on that happen. Algeria, Egypt, and South Africa, to some extent. I don't want to forget other countries, but not just the three countries that I mentioned. I know other friends of Sudan, Djibouti. They started to talk to African Union and giving them more advice, because African Union is not a commission. The commission headed by Moussa Faki are employees. They are not the African Union. The African Union is the African countries. And the African countries, you cannot hijack their will and submit it to the Westerners. You cannot do that. So that when Algeria came back with more efforts, they stopped the process of hijacking the African Union, and now we have better involvement. The latest meeting was in June, 15th of June, and we saw different faces in the June conference that happened in Addis Ababa. And then the position of Abiy Ahmed changed, and he came and to Port Sudan and visited Burhan, and that stopped the situation of hostility between Sudan and Ethiopia by 100%. Now the situation between Sudan and Ethiopia is back to normality. Still, Chad, the situation is not good, to be frank. Libya of Haftar is not good, but with Egypt, with Eritrea, with Ethiopia, and to a good level, South Sudan, the situation now is getting better. So the African Union is back. This is the conclusion I want to say. Even I started with criticism and I explained the situation, but the African Union now is back, and we are expecting an election because the term of Moussa Faki came to end. And there are two nominees, Mahmoud Yusuf from Djibouti and Raila Odinga from Kenya. But
Right,
now it's the round of East Africa. The previous round is yours, Central Africa. I'm sorry to criticize Moussa Faki. I know him personally, by the way. And he knows me, and we discussed from some time when I was in Washington, D.C. as media counselor for Sudan embassy there.
Okay.
But I have to say the right thing. Moussa Faki was closer to the Western influence than African solution for African problems.
Right. Thank you so much, Mekki. Of course, we are hoping to see that these reforms at the African Union continue, because we want a continental body that is more concerned about the problems of its people and trying to seek solutions that will actually benefit the people of Africa. Let me come back to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, earlier on, Mekki said something about these meetings that are currently ongoing in Sudan between the tribes and maybe the government to find a way forward to solving the problem in the country. And now he said the militia actually bombed one of these gatherings, one of these meetings. Now, in Africa, we have this common problem of having to fight amongst ourselves. What then? How can Africans be schooled? Now we are looking at it at a broader context. How can Africans be schooled that this is my brother, that is my sister? We should not be fighting against each other. And earlier on, Mekki mentioned something. He said that the United Arab Emirates, it's allegedly providing weapons to the Rapid Support Forces. So how then do we get Africans to think alike, that if we have this issue, we can go on the drawing board and seek a solution that is going to benefit us rather than fighting amongst ourselves? I think that's something that Africans need to be schooled on.
Well, I think that, and this is not just an issue with Sudan. If you look across the continent of Africa, we've had this somewhat demented idea that whatever is from the West is great. Whatever is from the West, it's beautiful, it's godly. It's something that we need to be able to espouse. But the reality is, and then the side effect of that has been we have literally minimized and completely refused our own personal growth, our own personal identity, who we are as a people, our cultures, our values, and our customs. So much so that what's African, it's not appetizing. What's African is not beautiful, and what's from the West seems to be what we celebrate, and we do not celebrate what's African. I think in more ways that paints a picture of where Africa has been, over the last 5, 6, or 7 decades. We have experienced this whole entire thing where we always look at the West for our salvation, and we are not looking, onto Africa, for our own liberation. Africans are responsible for the liberation of the continent of Africa. And I think that we have to begin this fight, more on a psychological level, where we begin to educate young Africans that what is African is truly great, what is African is truly beautiful, that our cultures and our values and our traditions are not inferior, to that of the West. We cannot constantly be looking at the West every single time, as if to say, they are the guys who are basically giving us the marching orders as what we need to do so far as the continent of Africa is concerned, or so far as our individual countries are concerned. And on the basis of groups like the United African Union, I think that, groups like that, in my opinion, it's I don't know, maybe we just basically start from scratch, all right? Because if you elect people, the African Union is not its bureaucrats, right? They're not the guys who have been hired, who were never elected in any of these African nations, and then we just basically hire a lot of people who basically go out and make decisions on behalf of the African Union. That's, a little bit quite troubling. But if you were going to look across the board and ask yourself, who make up the African Union? You're looking at presidents from different countries. And if you look closely, you'll realize that every single president, almost all of them on the African continent, is basically pandering to the West, or at best maybe some to the East, but a lot of them are actually pandering to the West. So whatever the West wants, okay, in the individual countries, you bet that that's what the West wants so far as the African Union comes together. What was the issue with the Sahel? The main problem with the Sahel, actually, there was really no issues with Mali, a little bit of an issue when it came to Burkina Faso, but the biggest noise came when it had to do with Niger. And the reason for Niger was because when the juntas came in, they decided that they were going to put an end to the Trans-Sahara pipeline. There was this pipeline, okay, that lived from Warri in Nigeria to Algeria, and then would have to get into Europe when America blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. So they had to be able to make sure that Europe, was warm. I was in Frankfurt. I was in Frankfurt a couple of months ago, and in the middle of the winter, and I actually had to beg the hotel that I was in because I couldn't find out where to turn on the heat. I had to beg them that this place is too cold, I can't sleep. And they brought me a little tiny heater, electric heater, just so that I could basically warm the room up. Now, it's later I realized that, hey, you know what, the whole country was basically suffering because they had no energy. That's how bad things were. But if you look at why America got all in arms with the ECOWAS, telling ECOWAS what to do, suspend, we're going to launch a counteroffensive, into Niger so that we can be able to restore Bazoum back to power, it was because they had billions of dollars invested in this pipeline to transport crude oil, to transport gas rather, from Warri in Nigeria all the way to Algeria and then distribute that into Europe. But if you look, I don't understand what the thinking was, because Algeria has a lot more natural reserves, just like Nigeria. And so Algeria is also in a better position to be able to help transport whatever stuff that they have, if they choose to do so, but not transporting that from sub-Saharan Africa. And what the rationale was behind that, apart from this economic, and how much money they were getting things. But the truth of the matter is, we have to be a little bit more consistent on the continent of Africa, especially when it comes to the EU, that the interest of the African has to be the interest of the African. You cannot superimpose the interest of the West to the interest of the African. You can no longer tell us that what you're doing is for the interest of the African, meanwhile it's all being engineered by the West, because obviously, just like I said, they play chess and we do checkers. All right, there are six plays down the line while we are still trying to figure out one. They've gone 6. So we have to be able to say, you know what, forget about all of these other things. Let us just focus on us as a people. How do we help this continent grow? And I think that we can begin, for example, in a place like Sudan. And and I can bet you that when you have a group of people sit down, okay, from opposing factions to be able, of different factions and opposing factions for that matter, to be able to discuss, how to move things forward, and you have a drone attack, that basically means that there are people who will do whatever it takes to make sure that there is no peace. And in that light, we have to also start making decisions on the African continent that basically says we will call anybody out who is supporting anything, and we will make sure that such cancer cells do not spread, all right? Such ideas. The salvation of the continent will come as a result of the unity that we have on the continent. It's not going to be offshore. It has to be onshore. It's not going to come from Europe. It's not coming from the Americas. It's coming from Africa. Africans are responsible for their own lives. They are responsible. Nobody can come out of the continent of Africa to tell us exactly how we need to live our lives and what we need to do. We must be responsible. I respect the values. I respect the traditions. I respect the customs of the African. And our customs, our traditions, and our values does not state all of this madness that is happening right now. The conflicts we have are engineered by the West, are engineered by, groups out in the Middle East and, out in the East. We have to be able to say to ourselves, how do we solve our own issues without all these French groups interfering? And the only way we do so is, first of all, electing people into power that are Pan-African, making sure that whenever militia groups do start, we need to know exactly who is sponsoring it, why they're sponsoring it, and then we need to go after those who are sponsoring it. All this proxy, fights that is taking place, for example, Qatar and Turkey, as we speak, are actually supporting militia groups within Sudan. That is crazy. I absolutely do not understand what the role of Qatar is and what Turkey is looking for in South Sudan, but that's just the way it is. Proxy war. We have to be able to make sure that the continent does not become a proxy center for everybody's battle. That should stop.
Thank you very much, Dr. FONGOD. Of course, the continent should not be used as a battleground or as a point of interest where the other parties only come in when they have their interest to fulfill on the continent. Now we are going to be looking at the humanitarian part of this crisis in Sudan, of this conflict, and how the Sudanese people have been affected. And now we have the World Food Programme that talked of famine in parts of Sudan. So we're going to listen to the Executive Director of the World Food Programme in the person of Stephen Omolo. And when we come back, we are going to comment on whatever he told the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday with regards to famine in Sudan.
Excellencies, the World Food Programme and other humanitarian agencies have been warning for months now of the widespread collapse in food security across the country. We have been clear that famine is real and dangerous possibility caused by the raging conflict, widespread displacement, and above all the denial of the humanitarian access by the warring parties. In March this year, the WFP briefed the Council members following the release of a White Note on a Resolution 2417, which signaled that famine was imminent. We warned then that aid agencies were being blocked from accessing significant parts of the country with food and other essential supplies. But our warnings have not been heard. The Famine Review Committee, FRC, has concluded that there is famine in Zamzam camp near El Fasher in North Darfur. The FRC is also warning that other areas in Darfur and elsewhere are at a high risk of famine if urgent action is not taken to provide life-saving assistance at the required scale. But as you've heard from my colleague Nocha, more than half of Sudan's population is facing crisis levels of hunger, and the numbers continue to climb. Over 750,000 people are currently classified as being in IPC Phase 5. They are experiencing catastrophic levels of food insecurity. And an estimated 730,000 children are projected to suffer severe acute malnutrition this year, the most life-threatening form of malnutrition. This is the first time that the committee has confirmed a famine for more than 7 years, and the only third time since the global monitoring system was launched 20 years ago. Now, conditions throughout Sudan are indeed appalling and getting worse by the day. This forgotten crisis has not received the political and diplomatic attention it desperately needs, and yet it has wider implications and threatens to destabilize the wider region. But last week's confirmation of famine must serve as a wake-up call for the international community and for the members of this council. There must now be a coordinated diplomatic effort to address the widespread operational challenges and impediments that aid agencies are facing every day as we try to reach millions of Sudanese people in abject need.
That was Stephen Omolo. He is the Assistant Executive Director of the World Food Programme there. He was giving reports to the United Nations Security Council on the current humanitarian situation in the country, and he talked of famine in parts of the country, especially in Darfur. He mentioned the Zamzam camp. And I'm coming back to you, MEKKI, to comment on what Stephen Omolo just said. Now, we have had reports in the news of late that there is a famine in Sudan. You have been following up this issue and you are on the ground. What can you say with regards to this? Is there actually famine in Sudan right now? Is MEKKI there? Is MEKKI with us? Well, we will be coming back to MEKKI to comment on this very important part of the crisis in the country, the humanitarian situation that Sudanese are being faced with at this point in time. We just listened to the Assistant Executive Director of the World Food Programme enlightening the United Nations Security Council of the humanitarian situation in the country. Let's get back to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, we just listened to Stephen Omolo. What can you say? Do you really think that Sudan is facing a humanitarian situation so much so that there is famine? Because earlier, we have a minister of the country who actually debunked this report of a famine in the country. What can you say about that?
There is famine in Sudan. And the notion that, the minister will come out to say there's no famine in Sudan is laughable. First of all, the level of conflict that has been taking place, and I think that maybe that's a way of trying to prevent, pseudo-humanitarian groups who do come into the country, but yet they are actually intelligence gatherings, operations, for the West. I think that maybe that's the reason why you deny this, so that you do not officially give them any upper channels. But apart from that, yes, for sure, there is famine in Sudan. The conflict has created an environment where farmers, especially in rural areas, because rural communities have literally been savaged by a lot of, by these armed militia groups. And so basically most people who live by subsistence farming, in those areas have not been able to practice their craft. So in the end, obviously, production and yield has reduced. So, crop yield, it's not what it's supposed to be. And obviously, a lot of people are starving. Whenever you have mass migration of people, all right, that creates a whole lot of humanitarian issues. And obviously, that also means that to the area that they are going to, there's a lot of scarcity of food resources in those particular areas. And a lot of people are not working. A lot of people who are supposed to be in their farms producing what will be sold in the local market, that is not happening. And so obviously, there's famine. We are talking about Sudan, rather. And Sudan is actually, just a little bit, south of the Sahara, and obviously embedded in the Sahel. That is absolutely, a place where if you just miss out on just a couple of days into, your planting season, you are toast. That's just what it is. So the notion that South Sudan is not having, those issues, it's just false. There is famine in Sudan.
Right, there is a famine in Sudan, and the executive director of the World Food Programme there mentioned that the crisis in Sudan seemed to be a forgotten crisis, and is actually calling on the international community to give more importance, to give more listening ear to what is happening in Sudan. And also just to mention that we have been seeing pictures of some Catholic nuns and priests. They were recently evacuated from where they were by the Sudanese armed forces in an operation that was launched on Monday. They have been there. They have been held captive of that area for a year and 4 months, and they just recently gained their independence. And this is thanks to the Sudanese armed forces. If MEKKI is back with us, is MEKKI back with us? MEKKI is not there now. This sisters of the Salesian, these are the sisters of Salesian of Don Bosco and the priest, and actually 20 other Sudanese were rescued from, were evacuated from this area, which it was actually under the control of the Sudanese armed forces, but then the rapid support forces actually took hold of that area. That's again by the Sudanese army. And what comments can you give on this, Dr. FONGOD, when you see what the Sudanese armed forces are doing? What is it that they cannot, why is it that they cannot reach an agreement so far with the rapid support forces to liberate people like this who have been held captive for more than a year?
Well, in most cases, you really do not even know who is in charge, especially when it's an active war. You don't know who is in charge. You don't know who you have to talk to be able to get people who are just trying to do God's work, who are just trying to be able to help those who can help themselves. And so I think this speaks a lot about, SAF. It speaks a lot about RSF. We have to be able to find ways where the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces find ways in being able to communicate together to make sure that civilians and people who have no issues at all, they're neither for, they're just there to be able to take care of those who can take care of themselves, are completely immune from every kind of attack and people being held against their will. And I think that also the Sudanese armed forces and also the rapid support forces should understand that when this war is over, all right, at some point in time, this fighting will stop. And when it stops, we will have to tally our victims. And while we are tallying the victims and those who have died as a result of this gross atrocity on humanity, we will also be able to find out those who commit war crimes. We will be able to basically sit down and talk about those who were actively involved, in creating scenarios like this that led to the deaths of people. So everybody needs to be able to understand that whatever you do and whatever is being pushed down your throat by your commanders, there is always a day of reckoning. And when that day comes, nobody will be able to save you. You would have to speak for yourself. You can speak for yourself now by doing that which is right. You can speak for yourself now by making sure that you're on the side of humanity, but not on the side of some French group forces. And secondly, the talk of the fact that maybe some foreign country is actually in support of what you're doing, that country will not be able to save you when the people rise up against what you have done. And so it's important for us to have this in mind. We are not, and we will never, at any particular point in time, support this kind of atrocity across the board, whether it's by the Sudanese armed forces or whether it's by the rapid support forces. We have to be able to make sure that those who have absolutely nothing to do with this conflict are protected. I'm talking about the civilians, all right? So we should not be in a situation where we are actually confused or we're using people as human shields. We can do that. We can be able to hold people as human shields in places, and hold them as prisoners, just so that we can be able to prevent ourselves from being attacked by those who are actively fighting in the war. That will be war crimes. We have to make sure that we stop this.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley FONGOD. Of course, we have to look for a way forward to bringing an end to this conflict in Sudan. And of course, it's affecting regional stability because if Sudan is affected, of course, it's going to affect the next country very close to Sudan. Now, let's take a look at the role of local communities and the civil society in advocating for peace in this whole situation, in this whole conflict in Sudan. Do you really think that the civil society and local communities, like we mentioned earlier on, that meetings are already ongoing between tribes and the government, do you really think they play a major role in seeking a peaceful and lasting solution to this problem in Sudan?
Absolutely. If you look at the construct of what it is that are the rebel groups, those rebel groups are actually made up of men and women who are coming, from these small tribes. And so these tribes are tribal leaders. When the tribal leaders actually do meet with the civic society members, what that entails is they are speaking to those who are speaking to those who are fighting. All right, they are speaking to those who have the capacity to speak to those who actually are carrying these arms and attacking. They understand their language, they understand the culture, they understand the people because they are from the same tribe. So it is vital that the government must be able to sit down with these tribal leaders and say, this is what we are looking for, this is why this is going on. And then the tribal leaders also should be able to tell the government, if this is what you want, this is what they're telling us, this is what is happening. This is the genesis of it. We were asking for this. This was not done. We asked for this. This was never done. And then they pick out arms. So this is where we are. I think that that is a more a constructive way of handling this issue, than trying to find out, how Switzerland looks like or Geneva looks like. We need to be able to have these groups talk. As long as we are talking on the African continent, as long as we are negotiating, all right, as long as we are going through different scenarios, different ideas, and trying to find out exactly what's going on, so we are bridging the gap between our brotherhood. We are bridging the gap between our own humanity and not taking orders or matching orders from the West or taking matching orders from the East. We must talk, absolutely. Without us talking, I don't understand how we end the war.
Right. Right now, if we are not able to sit on the same table, and like you mentioned, if these tribal leaders are not able to listen to their people and bring back what the people need to the government, and the government in turn at their own level are not able to listen to what they are saying, then this fighting may continue in the country. It is just for the warring parties to be able to find a common ground, sit down and talk about the matter, if I get you right. Now that the rapid support forces, from every indication from reports that we are getting, the rapid support forces are not ready to meet the government and talk about the matter. And the government, on the other hand, is saying that it doesn't want to have any negotiations with the rapid support forces. How then would this problem in the country be solved? Because we have already put aside the fact that we are having talks in Geneva or any other part of the world outside Africa, outside Sudan. That's not going to solve the problem of the Sudanese people. What then do these warring parties in Sudan need to do to be able to find a lasting solution to the problem? If the government is defiant and the rapid support forces are not ready to down their tools, how then do they come to a compromise in bringing an end to the conflict in the country?
The question is this: when the government basically decides that it will not talk to the rebel groups, and the idea is that once the government will talk to the rebel groups, the government legitimizes the rebel groups, and by so doing, whatever are the issues or the grievances that they come fighting for. The truth of the matter is the government is not some kind of an entity. They are not some, ecclesiastical group. These were carrying out ecclesiastical titles so that they think that they are super, powerful above everybody else. No. Who is the government? The government is made up of men and women who are citizens of that particular country. And the only responsibility they have is to manage the country, is to be able to run the country the best way that they can. So when somebody in the government says, we can do this, that's not your father's house. I don't understand exactly where we come with this. The democracy means power to the people. It is when the people elect a couple of folks to be able to speak on their behalf. And when the people pick up guns and when the people pick up arms, it's because the government is no longer listening to the people who elected them in the first place to be where they are. That's not your dad's property. You know, the notion that you have to sit and think that you're superior more than anybody else challenges the whole entire concept of what a government or democracy is. We have to talk. We shall. And believe me, everybody talks. Believe me, everybody talks. When it gets too hot, we'll negotiate. But the reality is, why wait to that point? Why do you have to allow a lot of people to die? Why do you have to allow mass migration, 2 million plus people being moved out of a particular area just because you think you're sitting in the position where you cannot negotiate? If you were being, think about this way, if any government did not have the support of the West, did not have the support of the East, and if these militia groups also did not have the support of the West or the support of the East or any other person in between, and all they had was themselves, nobody really will be fighting at this level. They will sit down and they will talk. I think that we have to go against the culture on the African continent where we elect leaders who are puppets for the West or the East, and also have militia groups in these countries that are puppets for the West or the East. This is absolutely crazy. And if you look at it, the only person who is suffering is the Sudanese, is the African, because these people from the Western world, nothing is happening in Washington, D.C. You don't hear about any shooting taking place because of what is happening in Sudan. You don't hear about any shooting taking place in New York. You don't hear about any shooting taking place in places like Atlanta. All you hear is what is happening in Sudan. We are our own worst enemies. The African is his own worst enemy. We have to find ways to handle our issues by ourselves. I don't care exactly, how difficult that is. The government must sit down and talk with the power brokers and speak with the people that he needs or she needs to talk to so that we can put an end to the crisis. People are dying. Nobody is supposed to die. That's my point.
Thank you very much, Dr. FONGOD. Of course, the warring parties in Sudan need to find a common ground where they can sit and talk and sort out issues and see into it that the country returns to normalcy and we don't have Sudanese leaving their countries to seek a refuge in other countries when they have everything over there in their own country. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, for joining us all the way from the United States. He's a Pan-Africanist. We equally had with us MEKKI ELMOGRABI. He is a writer as well as a journalist and an ex-diplomat of Sudan. I want to thank you so much for your wonderful insights, for your wonderful thoughts on the topic this day, and also want to thank our televiewers for always taking our time to be with us on Talking Point. Of course, we are going to be coming up with more interesting topics in our subsequent editions of the program. For now, we just want to wish you a wonderful moment in the company of more of our transmissions.